Brim, and I am the executive director of CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies. We are located at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. And before we get started, I just want to say a word or two about what we do and who we are. And I also want to ask for your help. So CLAGS is the first university-based research center for the study of LGBTQ people and history and ideas in the United States. We're proud to be at the Graduate Center. You can see a link to our website in the chat. One of the things we do is offer free public LGBTQ studies to everybody. And that means all of our events are free, and we want to welcome as many people from our communities into our events online like today, or at 365 Fifth Avenue in New York City to our in-person events. One way that you can help us is by giving us your time and attention at events such as this one. And you can also help us in material ways by going to our website, clags.org. You can see the link in the chat. There's a link, a button that you can click to donate to us. And we're sort of having a soft opening of a capital campaign this fall. We'll make the formal announcement in a couple weeks, but that campaign is called A Different Legacy. And that's because we want to build a different legacy of giving in the university world, one that moves away from class-based and race-based kinds of loyalty and giving to a kind of donations where it's equity that leads generosity. And so you can click the donate button and help us kick off that campaign in a quiet way before we do it in a couple weeks. And please look at our events page. We can offer all events online, virtually. And again, it's always free, and you are welcome to come to those online or in person. With that, I'll turn it over to Deborah Biswas, who is going to introduce our panelists for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you, Matt, and for that introduction. And I have to say, to echo what our executive director told you, and that is our work is especially urgent in times when extremist voices call for the erasure of queer and trans studies, as well as Black studies. So with your donation to CLAGS, you will help us show the world that understanding, not hate, is the future. So with that, I want to welcome you all. Good afternoon. If you are, in the Eastern Standard Time Zone, and but if not, then welcome to our conversation about Black studies and queer and trans studies now. My name is Deborah Biswas, and I'm a board member at CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies. But before we begin, I really want to thank you all for being here today. And we at CLAGS are honored and excited to hold this space with you this afternoon. So I want to, I just want to begin by acknowledging the fact that the American Association of University Professors, that is the AAUP's efforts, have led to significant contributions to protecting the rights of academic freedom in the United States, particularly with the 1940 Statement of Principles on Academic Freedom and Tenure and the subsequent comments that were added to it since then. So we have to remember that the tenure part of it is very important, and we'll talk more about it. However, the ambiguous formulation of what academic freedom and academic responsibility really mean in practice have left us vulnerable to repeated attacks on our freedom to both teach and learn. For example, I'm thinking of about the McCarthy era of the 1950s, the Vietnam protests of the 1960s and early 70s, the law school debates about critical race theory in the 80s, and also the culture wars, which are basically attacks on Black and ethnic studies and gender and sexuality studies on campuses, and the continuation of those culture wars well into our current moment, right? The 90s culture wars. Learning often happens, I would say, beyond the university, but teaching and research, given our existing economic system, are difficult without the backing of important resources, such as grants, salaries, access to libraries, and so on. This is why we have titled our conversation Freedom to Teach. So give you a little bit of background. We saw a heightening of ongoing attacks on Black studies and queer and trans studies with the College Board's decision to revise its curriculum for an advanced placement African American Studies course in January of this year. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said in January at a Jacksonville school that just when the Black History Month was beginning, that the College Board prescribed AP African American class is using Black history to, quote, shoehorn in queer theory. And furthermore, he said, quote, this course on Black history, what's one of the lessons about? Queer theory? Now, who would say that an important part of Black history is queer theory? That is somebody pushing an agenda on our kids. And so when you look to see they have stuff about intersectionality, abolishing prisons, that's a political agenda, end quote. I'm sorry to subject you to that. And he took us to that upside down world by saying, quote, final quote, we want education, not indoctrination. If you fall on the side of indoctrination, we are going to decline. If it's education, then we will do, and end quote. So we all understand, thankfully over here, I hope we all understand that DeSantis's agenda is indoctrination and that Black queer studies is the education that we need in our current moment. So given this context, we have invited two professors who currently live and work in Florida and are on the front lines of this war on Black studies and gender and sexuality studies. We have also invited our board co-chair, who doesn't teach in Florida, but at a public college in New York, where we are yet to see legislative laws being passed to curb our academic freedom to teach and learn. Also, each of our guest speakers have had the experience of chairing a Black Studies and or Gender and Sexuality Studies department at their respective institution. So without further ado, let us welcome our speakers. First, we will go alphabetically. So Sharon Wright Austin is a professor of political science at the University of Florida. Her research focuses on American urban and African American political behavior and public policies. She's the author of Race, Power, and Political Emergence in Memphis, The Transformation of Plantation Politics, and several other books that she has written and co-edited with important scholars in the field. Amy Reid is professor of French and director of the Gender Studies program at New College of Florida, a public liberal arts college where the board of trustees, with a majority appointed by Governor DeSantis in January 2023, recently abolished both their Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, and their Gender Studies program, abolished. In May, Amy was elected chair of the new College of Faculty and thus sits on the board of trustees. And her research focuses on contemporary Francophone African literature. She's an award-winning translator, and her recent works include the novels A Trail of Crab Tracks by Patrice Nginang, The Blunder by Matelon. I'm sorry, I'm totally butchering these names. Sorry about that. And she's also the member of the MLA Committee on Academic Freedom, Professional Rights and Responsibilities, and Miss Magazine's Committee of Scholars. And Laura Westengard is an associate professor of English at New York City College of Technology, City University of New York, where she's the coordinator of the interdisciplinary minor in gender and sexuality studies. She serves as board co-chair of CLAGS and sits on the editorial board for the journal WSQ Women's Studies Quarterly. And her book, Gothic Queer Culture, Marginalized Communities and the Ghosts of Insidious Trauma, was released in 2019 by University of Nebraska Press. So to initiate this discussion, I would ask, to begin this discussion, I want to ask each of our speakers to take about a little bit of time to share, reflect, and theorize on the stakes of teaching in and or serving as a chair of Black Studies or Gender and Sexuality Studies department or program, amidst this organized hostility towards and even the erasure of some of these departments and programs. Sharon, would you start us all?
Hello, everybody, and thank you again for inviting me to have this really important conversation. I want to first of all just talk a little bit about, I know we only have a few minutes, so I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I'm always blown away by the fact that so few of our students know anything about their history. And you just read the quote from our governor about, how he questions whether queer history would have anything to do with Black history. And that shows his ignorance of Black history, because I was really just right before we began this webinar, I was looking online, and there's a movie coming on Netflix this weekend about the life and legacy of Bayard Rustin. I've talked about him, and I showed a documentary called Brother Outsider in my African American politics class. And he was like a civil rights pioneer who worked alongside Dr. King. And so there are so many others like him. I teach a class called African Americans in Paris, and we talk about James Baldwin and Josephine Baker. And a lot of people don't know about their sexual orientations as well. So, those are people that you don't really hear very much about when you hear about Black history, but students do need to know about them because of the important contributions they make. So it's not about indoctrination, it's about just educating people about people and issues they should be concerned about. But I know we only have a few minutes, so I'll try to be brief, but there are so many things that I'd like to say that I hope that we get to address today. But the one thing, if I don't get to say anything else, I want to talk about the fact that some of the legislation, like what's being passed here in Florida, is making people feel more comfortable with their prejudices. And it's almost as if there's an assumption or a belief that racism or discrimination generally just doesn't exist. And that's not true, because even as an educator who's been doing this now for over 30 years, I even still have to deal with different types of discrimination, and my students do as well, whether it be racial microaggressions or other types of things. So there's definitely a need for a safe space on our campus, and that's why places like on our campus, the Institute for Black Culture, the Institute for Hispanic Latino Cultures, Multicultural Diversity Affairs, those places, those resources are very important, because students can be very isolated and they deal with a lot of what we call onlyness, being the only person from their racial, ethnic group, or of their sexual orientation, or one of few, and being in those hostile spaces where they're dealing with all kinds of harassment and discrimination. So that's why it's very important that people like myself continue to keep up the fight. As a full professor, I still am not someone that couldn't be retaliated against, but that's why I feel like I have an obligation to fight. So I'll just stop right there for now.
Thank you. And you just mentioned so many important things, but before that, I'll pass it over to Amy. Would you take it from here?
So, DeBardi, are you going to show my slides?
Yes, I will.
Okay. So I want to thank everyone for having us here today. The title we were given was Freedom to Teach. And unfortunately, the thing I have to say is that from my point of view at New College of Florida, we have no more freedom to teach. And I chose these pictures at the bottom just as an illustration of what we are facing on our campus. For the past number of years, we had the sign on the left showing bathrooms. This is just down from my office. Men's bathroom to one side and an all-gender bathroom to the other. The all-gender was covered up. They did not like those words anywhere on campus. And then it was just totally torn down. As you see in the middle, that's currently what's there. In the meantime, some students put up stickers. So if you see, they've transferred men and ladies to "Me, I Die." Those stickers were up for a few weeks and then were taken down. Okay. So we're in a place where trans people can't use the bathroom, where faculty in the K-12 and in the state college system are told that if they don't enforce bathroom bans, they can lose their jobs. So we have already lost the freedom to teach. Next slide, please. So the dominoes fall at New College. I just want to give people a quick sense of how quickly things changed at New College. In January, on January 6th, yes, the second anniversary of the storming of the Capitol, Ron DeSantis appointed a new majority to our Board of Trustees that came on with very violent language saying that they were going to take over the campus and that those of us, faculty and students who were not on board, could just self-select out. Okay. They said that one person floated firing all the faculty. They haven't fired all the faculty, but in quick succession, they fired our first female president, the dean of diversity, who was a queer person of color, our provost, who was a woman, the director of student success, a woman of color, the head research librarian, a queer Jewish woman. That all happened between January and April. In addition, they've denied tenure to 5 faculty members, encouraged 2 others not even to apply. They've painted over murals. They've driven away our faculty. They've charged people with crimes for speech offenses. Okay. One student was charged with bullying because they said a curse word, granted, to our president, but in a public meeting, they yelled one curse word and they were charged with bullying the president. Doesn't make any sense. They closed our Pride dorm. They threw out the books. They threw out the decorations. They've thrown out other books that faculty had on free tables to give away to students. And in August, the Board of Trustees, on which I sit, voted to abolish the gender studies program, leading to the resignation of our one tenure track line in gender studies, a trans man and an amazing scholar. Next slide, please. So things are pretty bleak in Florida. They're using a language of free speech and academic freedom in order to shut down free speech on our campus and frankly across the state. We can look at laws across the state that limit what we teach. Just this past week, the Board of Governors took sociology out of the statewide general education curriculum because sociology teaches people to analyze for systemic racism and systemic sexism. So they got rid of that class as part of the gen ed. Trans bathroom bans, limiting of tenure. On our campus, we have censoring of emails. We have censoring of chalking. We don't know who's doing it. At the top of the screen, you see a mural. Students had installed murals on our campus several years ago with full permission of the campus. Those were painted over with next to no notification. The beigification of our campus and of discourse is going. So we can no longer talk about the freedom to teach at New College of Florida. Thank you. We'll leave it there.
Thank you, Amy. Laura, would you, we have a lot to talk about, but Laura, would you share your thoughts on this with us?
Yes, absolutely. It is so chilling to listen to the narrative that Amy just told and what is going on in Florida. And it feels, sort of surreal to be looking at it from New York State and New York City, working within CUNY, the City University of New York, a public institution. I want to echo what Sharon mentioned, that you said that there's no Black studies without queer studies, and conversely, there's no queer studies without Black studies. These two topics are intimately entwined in our histories and our presence, and it's really essential that we always, bring those two together when we're talking about these topics. So So what I think I want to do today, coming from CUNY, where we haven't yet, and I say yet because I think that Florida is setting a precedent for the rest of the states and opening up doors to censorship and the shutting down of programs in ways that could easily infiltrate into states where we maybe least expect it. So I think we need to remain vigilant. But right now, we're not facing those explicit legislative attacks. However, I want to point to the more implicit kind of institutional structures and biases that we have faced, and continue to face in a public institution. And specifically, I'm coming from a college of technology, which has its own specificities around um, the institutional value that's placed on gender and sexuality studies and African American studies. And also, I'm coming from a background in critical trauma studies. So I want to bring this in a little bit to think about the implicit institutional traumas that exist even in places where explicitly it seems like, we're avoiding the fray. So following Matt Brim's work on poor queer studies, and it's an honor to have Matt Brim here. Perhaps he can even join in the conversation at some point, because he has a really important perspective on queer studies at public institutions. So following Matt Brim's work on poor queer studies, I believe in the importance of building queer studies programs at poorly funded public institutions such as CUNY, at colleges of technology such as City Tech, where I work, because queer studies, gender and sexuality studies can intervene, I believe, in what I like to call bureaucratic trauma. This is something that I experience anecdotally with my students all the time. These accumulated and unacknowledged traumatic effects of navigating educational systems that invalidate and isolate certain students. So I think one of you two mentioned the oneification. Was that the word of the students being the one representative, which is like super isolating. So just to back up, the study of trauma onlyness. Thank you. The study of trauma began in the 19th century, right, with investigations of the psychiatric and biological impact of bounded traumatic events like train accidents, war, natural disasters, events that could easily be identified as a crisis. But critical trauma studies sort of pushes beyond the privileging of the bounded traumatic event to recognize the necessity of, quote, an ethics of intellectual and moral engagement that interrogates the political and cultural work that trauma does. So, institutional bureaucracies can have traumatic effects on those who occupy subject positions outside of those favored by institutional structures, or who have no framework to recognize their struggle with bureaucracy as ongoing crises. And this is covered, kind of extensively in relation to trans folks by Dean Spade and his work specifically in normal life. So when vulnerable students and also when vulnerable students who are often like the first in their family to attend college on our campuses, who are immigrants, who are working class, when they attempt to navigate institutional academic structures with little experience and almost no assistance, it can produce traumatic effects. And I see this often through the need to obsessively narrate their institutional experiences in order to make sense of a nearly impossible bureaucratic system. And I see echoes of that today amongst even us, right? We are processing our traumatic experiences within institutional structures that are, shutting down our ability to teach and represent our truths. And so but I do see students do something that I call like a trauma loop. They will come in and say, I need to use the restroom, but the I identify as this gender, and there's only that gendered restroom on every other floor of the building, and I am in a wheelchair, so it takes me longer to get to the other floor, and the elevators are too crowded and it takes a long time, so then I'm late for class. And then because I can't find the bathroom, and then it's sort of like this obsessive looping. So I think that the lack of recognition that some institutional structures are traumatically impossible for certain student populations also produces this traumatic effect. So this sort of invisibility of the challenges that students face. So queer studies at institutions other than elite high status universities is essential because queer studies is a field uniquely positioned to mitigate some of the effects of bureaucratic trauma. So Maurice Stevens explains that the previous emphasis on bounded traumatic experience privileges, quote, a racially unmarked citizen subject, but at its base is the notion that trauma is not simply a concept that describes particularly overwhelming events, nor is it simply a category that holds people who have been undone by such events, but it is a cultural object whose function produces particular types of subjects and predisposes specific affect flows that then manages and ultimately shunts into political projects of various types. Trauma does not describe, trauma makes. So I'm going to just stop there, and I just want to offer that as a way to kind of interrogate the ways that institutional structures in their passivity, in their maybe silences, and in their very structures are ways that create a kind of experience that deeply impacts our vulnerable student populations, even without these kinds of explicit attacks that we're seeing in other states.
That's a great point that, that the ways in which the intellectual and moral effects of trauma kind of haunts us through these, what you call the insidious trauma, right? Like that kind of affects us through these through institutional structures within which we have to function, right? And also it affects our students. It also affects professors who are not tenured and who are, who also comes from various backgrounds, marginalized backgrounds, right, where you're not supposed to say certain things and so on. So given that, one of the things I want us to talk about is, and, particularly Sharon and Amy, I'm asking, maybe this is a good point to think about the history of these programs in your departments, programs in at your respective institutions. And, maybe you can share with us like when or, did these departments get established, or, were previous administrations prior to the hostile takeover of the education system, particularly in Florida, provide institutional support for these programs? Or was it always a struggle, like to do Black and gender and sexuality studies within, states like in states like Florida? So Sharon, do you want to start us?
Well, I can start. I was the director of the African American Studies program here at University of Florida from 2011 until 2019. So I did it for 8 years. And we had a former director. The program was first founded in 1969. The first director served from 1970 to 2000. His name was Dr. Ronald Foreman, and he's now deceased, but he pretty much ran the program just one person. He was given very little. He only had one part-time staff member, and that was for 30 years. He managed to just keep it going as best he could. So to answer your question, I don't think African American studies has ever been welcome, not just at our university, but at universities as a whole, because keep in mind, when you think about the Black campus movement, these were programs that were put together probably in like the late 60s, early 70s, And it was after a lot of student protests took place. And that was exactly the case here at the University of Florida. Students protested. The first Black students were admitted during the 1960s. More of them were admitted by the late 60s and early 70s. And they began to ask for Black professors, a curriculum that was more diverse. And there was a lot of opposition. It was never welcomed, but the students wouldn't take no for an answer. And I think that's what students are going to have to do in today's society as well. It's a different kind of pushback, because for a long time, a lot of us had fooled ourselves into thinking that the racial climate had improved so much that people were welcoming. And now we know that this is the way people really have always thought about the programs that many of us are involved in. It's just that now you have people who are willing to come out and say it. These programs have never been welcome. Even when I was a director of Black Studies for the 8 years I was there, I was able to finally get approval for the African American Studies major because we'd had a minor since 2006. We got the major approved during the 2013-2014 academic year. And at one time, we had more majors in African American Studies here than anywhere else in the country. We had over 100 students majoring in African American Studies, which was awesome. We had huge enrollments in our courses. And I'm not sure exactly what type of politics I got hooked up in or what, but all I know is that one day I had been the director for 2 terms. My second term was ending, and I was called into the dean's office and I was told that my term would not be renewed, which I had no problem with because I wanted to get back to my research, but I couldn't understand why. But it's a long story, but there were a lot of politics involved. But I have no idea why they chose to go with a different director. But now, based on what I've heard and based on what I've seen, the data shows that there are less than 20 African American studies majors. And so I think that a lot of things were done intentionally as a way to try to destroy the major, to sort of drive students out of it. Because one of the things that I even noticed when I taught a course this summer, I usually get a lot of African American studies majors who are athletes, namely on our football team. And I had probably about 10 football players in my class this summer, and none of them were majoring in African American studies. And that to me was shocking because I guess a significant number, if not the majority of them, were always majoring in it. So I think that some things are being done as a way. I would not be surprised to get an announcement tomorrow saying that African American studies doesn't exist. It would really be a huge disappointment. I still have a very good relationship with the program, with the people who are there. But one of the problems that I'm noticing is that with each new director, at least here at the University of Florida, that person pretty much has to start over. So unlike other programs and departments that build upon prior successes, that's not the case here. When we received a new director, all of the older faculty, the senior faculty like myself, were pretty much driven out. And we now have new faculty who are mostly untenured, who can't really question and challenge things. And I think that that is not done coincidentally. I think it's done on purpose. And also, as a person who's been in political science since 2001, political science has several faculty members who've been there for 20 years or longer, like myself. I've been at UF for 22 years, and they don't have that in African American studies. Now you have people who've only been there for like 5 years or less, who don't know about the way that previous directors and previous faculty and staff were pretty much treated badly, were driven out, and they don't know about that. And I think a lot of that is done as a way to stop programs from having the kind of success that they could have. So there are a lot of, like, I guess, subtle politics that go on in these programs and departments that students are not aware of, but the students need to really be involved. And that's why I really am hoping that the people who are watching this webinar are faculty, but also we really do need the help of students, because if we don't have the support of students when people come in, whether they be politicians or administrators, and try to take over these campuses, we're not going to be able to fight very much.
Thank you. Before I jump in, Amy, do you want to add to that, same
Yeah,
history?
I guess I'll just sort of echo that things I've seen sort of parallel that. And I think Laura talked about the need for queer and trans studies in impoverished university systems, right? And New College has always been the underfunded unit. We're the smallest by far. We're a strange little bunion on the the foot of Florida in a sense. And on our campus, women's and gender studies has been underfunded relative to other programs. For the first 6 years that I was director, I did a stint. I was the first director of the program starting in 2006 to 2012. I was not paid at all. People for other programs were paid, but I was not. And I insisted that they pay the person who came after me. We had been trying to start an Africana Studies program at New College. A small group of us were working. We thought we had enough people to sort of build this out. But now we're in an entirely hostile environment. And so my colleagues are going, and the institution will not give us funds. They took away the budget for gender studies before Senate Bill 266 came into law. They already got rid of my budget. And they keep on telling me that they didn't get rid of it. It's somewhere. The money is somewhere, Amy, but it's gone, right? So we have to be aware of the way that the institutions are going to use us, take our political commitments and our desire to help our students and use that to make us work for free. And then when they get a chance, they'll pull the legs out from underneath us. Yeah. I'll just leave it at that. So like gender studies, we had our first tenure track line. It's empty now because Nick Clarkson resigned. But I've been at meetings where they've told me, we are filling every empty tenure track line. And I'm like, but not gender studies. And they're like, well, that's different. And then they say, we're filling every area of high demand. And I say, but that's gender studies. And they say, yeah, but you don't really count. And so they're sort of just erasing us from the conversation, even when I, as chair of the faculty, have a seat at the table where these discussions are happening. It's pretty frustrating.
Yes, I mean, just to quickly add to that, Amy, I'm so sorry, everything that you're going through, and Sharon too. I was teaching at New College of Florida, and I was teaching both in the gender studies program and was trying to work with you and many others to start the Africana studies. There was interest, like, Sharon spoke about student interest and how students made possible these departments, but their freedoms are increasingly being attacked, not only in Florida, even in other states, even in New York, even in Massachusetts, everywhere. So we do know that there is a kind of heightening of organized attacks on speaking for and about marginalized communities, right? Particularly Black studies and queer and trans studies, and the other thing Sharon mentioned was about not having tenure. So, not only in Florida I know New College has been mostly replaced by visiting assistant professors, right? So no tenure. Increasingly, even in New York, we are seeing less and less those of us, those who are in the job on the job market, they are not finding tenure track positions. It's all full-time, but they're not tenure track, right? So I am really lucky that I am teaching at City Tech, where the only department that really got tenure track lines was the African American Studies department. I have to say that. So, we take little victories. I have to give it to our chair, Dr. Renata Ferdinand, for being able to do that, but also the administration who worked with her to make that possible. But everybody who came into City University of New York, most of them are working in some kind of full-time line, not tenure track. So with that, I would ask Laura to jump in, because especially you said that why you started, you sort of started talking about why queer and trans studies, gender and sexuality studies department in a place like City Tech, right? And I was thinking, I once met a phlebotomist, like one who is trained in drawing your blood for testing or donation, and I know City Tech students often come here to learn about medical tech. Now, this phlebotomist was really surprised to know that I teach Black studies and gender and sexuality studies. And they said, what do you mean? You just teach about he, she, why. So since you lead such a program at a school where many students come to pursue studies in various technology fields, I was wondering if you can talk about what it meant to make such a radical intervention at City Tech in the first place. Like, how did you start? How did you find funding and so on?
Thank you. Yes, it has been a long road. And so I began at City Tech in 2012. And I want to make note, I am an English professor, right? I was hired on a tenure track line in the English department. I'm an associate professor in the English department. And when I arrived, I was, I guess I was starry-eyed about the City University of New York and coming to a campus in downtown Brooklyn and, looking at all of CUNY and expecting to see a really robust and already established gender and sexuality atmosphere, right? A climate with lots of programs that were institutionalized. So I was really surprised when I got to City Tech and discovered that there were no classes in women's and gender studies. There was no student lounge for LGBTQ students. There was not an active student club for LGBTQ students or events or programming. There was just no presence on campus. And I was so fortunate to have a colleague in the English department as well, Professor Monique Farrell, who had the vision to try to start a gender studies program from the ground up. So we weren't seeing this as a college-wide initiative, but she came to me and she said, I want to start essentially an option. So language in this red tape bureaucracy of CUNY is very important. And an option was at that time something that was kind of like a major for those who are getting their associate's degrees. And that's something that's very unique to City Tech in that we are a college that offers both 2-year and 4-year degrees. And it really brings in this wide swath of students with different kinds of professional goals. For example, like our rad tech program and some of our dental hygiene programs are 2-year professional degrees. And then you can add 2 years to get your bachelor's degree and that sort of thing. So there was nothing. And so I worked with Professor Farrell to help support her creation of this package of English classes that were gender and sexuality focused. And that didn't make it through the college governance process. So we had to regroup. And we recognized that it was important for this to be an interdisciplinary program. So rather than having it be all English classes, we did outreach to other departments around the college and brought in classes that either were created or were already being offered that had a gender and sexuality theme. So this became an unofficial cluster of courses that we had so not a department, not a program, not an option, nothing that would officially appear on student transcripts or in the college catalog. It's just that these courses existed, and we could advocate to students like this is helpful. If you sort of pick your gen ed requirements carefully, you can have this focus, but it's not going to show up on your transcript in any way. So that operated like that for a number of years. And I have to say, once Professor Farrell stepped aside as the sort of driving force behind that, I took over as the driving force behind that. It was a single person's effort for many, many years, like first hers and then mine, with no budget, no office, no assistant, nothing. And this was really something that we had to use the existing college structures and resources and kind of hustle to make this cluster look like a program. And then from there, I actually joined a college level committee and began to gather other folks together with me on a subcommittee to explore the possibility of creating minors at the college. We didn't have minors. So students in a 4-year degree programs could only major in a degree program. And so in order to institutionalize what has become the minor in gender and sexuality studies, first we had to create minors and then propose gender and sexuality studies as one of those minors. So now after 11 years since the start of this, we do have an academic minor. We don't have a department. We don't have any budget. We don't have a budget. We don't have any faculty lines, and there is no reassigned time for the coordinator of the minor. So like you were saying, Amy, this is free labor. It's kind of a labor of love. It's under the umbrella of service. We have increasing institutional and administrative support. And I have to shout out to my dean, who has been like absolutely 100% supportive of doing this work and has worked with me on the minors committee. But it still remains that there is not an institutional investment in terms of resources for this. So it does kind of echo the circumstance that you were describing, Amy. Yeah, I see your hand.
I just wanted to piggyback on one thing that you said, which was using the gen ed requirements in order to draw students in. And what we've seen in Florida on the statewide level is legislation to make sure that that is not possible. So with the changes to gen ed programs, you're now, nothing can be done. There's no money to be spent on DEI or on activism, which is their code word for gender studies. But then they also said that all gen ed classes in the humanities had to include the Western canon, which means that most of the courses that I have developed that are in African literature or Caribbean literature, and then cross-listed with gender studies, can no longer count for the gen ed curriculum, right? And that is something that I hope people everywhere start looking out for, because this is a strategy we will see rolled out in other states. Pick away. We're just modifying the gen ed. We're not stopping your program, but ultimately it is kicking the legs out from under any program that's trying to grow.
Yeah, and I just want to really just follow up on that and just say those gen ed courses, for people who aren't familiar with them, they're very important because usually they're required, and those are the major courses that help us with our enrollments, and enrollments are very important in these departments and programs. So without the gen ed courses, you don't get nearly as many students, and then people will be able to say, well, we're eliminating your department or we're eliminating your program not because of any type of bias on our part, but you don't have any students. And so everything sort of has a hidden meaning. So it's discriminatory, but it's really, really difficult to prove.
Yeah, I mean, all of you, kudos and, so much love for all the struggles that you have, the wars you have waged to get us here, right? To kind of build these departments, even though, they're always under attack. So one of the things that I'm hearing from all of you is that there is a need, like students do want these kind of programs, but then there is a way in which that desire is constantly getting attacked as well if the administration comes and abolishes these departments. For example, happening at New College of Florida, University of Florida. Sharon, you can talk more about it. It's a bigger university, and I know I have to quote this the great professor Khalil Gibran Muhammad's words, for democracy now, he said, quote, Florida is a laboratory of fascism at this point, right? And this is because he said that at a point when, I have to say this, some of our Kessler winners, our prestigious award Kessler, which we annually give out, the winners of such awards, E. Patrick Johnson, who is going to, who is our recent winner. Also, Kianga, not Kianga, I'm sorry, Kathy Cohen, and so many others who are now whose books are banned. Angela Davis, her book has been banned. So many of them have made this banned book list, right? So I don't know, like, would you talk about what's happening at University of Florida, because it's a larger public university? Like, does it have the resources to fight legislative attacks? Like, I have this poster behind me, and you can see that ACLU is tracking currently some 500 and over bills and laws. Some even became laws that are passed. So, Sharon, would you share anything that you would like to about on this
Well,
topic?
the one thing that really helps is our union. The United Faculty of Florida is very active. I was always a member of the union. I never thought I would ever need their help. But the United Faculty of Florida is fighting this. And then also the ACLU chapter in Florida, and they've worked with other civil rights organizations like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We didn't mention the HB 7, the Stop Woke Act, which pretty much dictates the way that you're supposed to teach, and it bans things like critical race theory in the 1619 project by Professor Nicole Hannah-Jones. And that is something that was passed into law, and there now is a preliminary injunction against it because the ACLU filed a lawsuit along with the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, and other civil rights organizations came together to file that lawsuit. And the title of that lawsuit, I put it in the chat, is Purnell versus Lamb. And I know that because I'm proud to say that I'm one of the plaintiffs in that lawsuit. There are 7 faculty, and there is one student who's a senior at Florida State. And so far, because we have a preliminary injunction, the state cannot enforce that. But some professors are willingly, well, I won't say willingly, they're afraid. They're being intimidated into changing their teaching, eliminating readings, changing the titles of courses, getting rid of certain courses altogether. Even though Stop Woke is not supposed to be something that forces them to do that, they're doing so just out of fear, especially people who are untenured. But we also have a very active student body at the University of Florida, and at Florida universities in general. I was really honored to be able to participate in an academic freedom symposium at the new college, and I was very impressed with things that their students are also trying to do. Just even this past weekend, Amy and I and some students from her university and mine participated in an excellent tour called Teach the Truth by Professor Marvin Dunn and former professor at New College, Eric Wallenberg. And we were just talking about Black history in the state of Florida. But there are different ways that people are fighting back, fighting against book bannings, fighting just in general. And so I have been impressed with that. But if anything, this is a lesson to young people who really have benefited from the struggles of their parents and grandparents and ancestors, to let them know that regardless of how well you think you're doing or how many freedoms you think you have, nevertheless, you still have to fight. Because if you don't, we've been able to get the preliminary injunction. The oral arguments for Purnell versus Lamb are in January 2024. Hopefully, we'll get a positive ruling. We got a positive ruling from at the district court level. Hopefully, at the appellate court level, that will be upheld. Amy mentioned SB 266. So far, that hasn't been challenged by a lawsuit, and the reason for that is because, correct me if I'm wrong, Amy.
No, there are 2 lawsuits
Oh, okay. Wow.
challenging from New College of Florida faculty, alumni, and our union
Okay.
have filed 2 different lawsuits, one in state court, which is moving on, and one in federal court where they were not granted a preliminary injunction 2 weeks
Okay.
ago, but
Okay.
we're still hopeful. But 2 of them.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that because I didn't know. I know I'm not familiar with one at UF, but that's really good news. But so we are fighting in the courts. We're fighting with activism on campus. So far, our diversity equity programs have not been eliminated to my knowledge. I wouldn't say that that won't happen in the future, but so far, to my knowledge, it hasn't. I'm on sabbatical this year, but I've still been keeping up with what's been going on campus. So.
We will open this up to our audience. If anybody has any questions, please, put your questions in the Q&A and we will take your questions, but we will keep talking. So, if you all want to ask us any questions or anything that you think we should address, let's just keep talking. And hopefully our audience members will ask us something that will generate more discussion. Yeah, Laura, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just you asked us about why we might be seeing a rise in organized hostility towards these departments and programs. And from a queer studies perspective, it is really important to point out that though there is this narrative of liberal progress around the concept of visibility is not always for the better for vulnerable populations. So I'm thinking about the way people talk about trans visibility, for example, and how we have been having a backlash against the visibility that we see in mainstream media, for example. And politicians are using this moment of transition where we have maybe increased visibility or awareness in the popular imagination around certain groups, paired with maybe a lack of understanding. This moment, politicians are jumping on and using to scapegoat these populations and move their political agenda forward. And we have seen this over and over again throughout the 20th century. And David Eng does a really nice job of talking about the way that LGBTQ rights and the rights of people of color have always been in sort of tension and conversation within this kind of political agenda that we're seeing playing out. And it's just happening, again. So I just want to sort of draw attention to the idea that, there are complications that arise with the question of visibility, that now these programs are on people's radar, right? That critical race theory is now something that people are aware of when maybe they hadn't heard of it before or don't fully understand what it is. And so they're able to, they absorb the way that this is narrativized for them through like media outlets and politicians, for example. And that's a really dangerous space.
So we have a question from the audience, if anyone wants to take that up, and it says, any advice for aspiring scholars of Black queer theory, especially those pursuing degrees outside of Black and queer studies departments? Sorry, somehow the question,
look under the answered tab.
Yeah. And it says, especially those pursuing degrees outside of Black and queer studies departments. I'm applying to anthropology, PhD programs. Thank you for your advice so far and this important conversation. So any advice for scholars of Black queer theory? That is what the question is about. Outside, pursuing degrees outside of Black and queer studies departments. So, I'm guessing from English or, anthropology, for example, what would be, yeah, go ahead, Amy.
I mean, I guess on the one hand, I'll just say be brave, right? Know that in this moment, it's not going to be an easy row in a lot of places, but that doesn't mean that the work isn't important, and perhaps it makes it all the more important. And I would say ask questions explicitly when you're doing your application. Make sure that there are structures in place for graduate certificates, organizations that are explicitly queer, trans, just supportive institutional groups. When I was applying to graduate school, I was pretty naive about the whole thing, but I did send a letter to every place I was considering saying, I'm interested in feminist theory. And so the places that wrote back and said, we don't do that, it was easy to just not apply. So
I will, quickly, I will just remind our audience, member who asked this question, Roderick Ferguson, who also won our CLAGS's Kessler Award, and his book is banned currently. And his definition of queer of color critique is that, because it's a queer of color analysis, extends women of color feminism by investigating how intersecting racial, gender, sexual practices antagonize and conspire with the normative investments of nation states and capital, mouthful, end quote. But it is without doing this, we cannot understand how to investigate, complicate, conspire with our investments in nation states and capital. Without doing that, how do we even think about dismantling hierarchies of oppression? How do we stand against forms of settler colonialism? I'm guessing those are still bad things, right? So we need to fight those. And I think Black Queer Studies teaches us how to do that. But yes, yeah.
I'd love to add for the student that I have had grad students come to me recently asking about how do I survive graduate school without having the support of my program, right? Without them fully understanding the kind of interdisciplinary research that I want to do in these other fields like queer studies and Black studies. And one thing that I say over and over again is find your people outside of your department and outside of your institution. Start to really build your networks and your communities, people who will support you and understand what you're doing in the broader academic field, because these grad programs that we go into, even if on paper they say they offer support for this kind of work, they're still within the structures of the academy, which are, founded on elitism, hierarchy, and white supremacy. And so, like, to return to the question of bureaucratic trauma, I think that we can expect to encounter systems of oppression that are instrumentalized through the academy. So just know that going into it, and build your kind of undercommons, build your group of people who are going to try to work together to support each other and do the work that is important to you and in your heart, maybe despite the fact that you might not find all of the support you expect.
I think our executive director, Matt Brim, has questions. So if you all want to take that. I heard someone, Matt, do you want to ask us the question? I don't know if you're there. So Matt is asking, I heard someone frame this issue of anti-Black initiatives in higher ed as, among other things, an effort to keep white youth ignorant. Does this resonate with the panelists? And also, this is a way of creating an ignorant voting public that will keep certain politicians in power. That's a very important question if you all want to take it.
Well, I can just briefly just say that it's an effort to try to, I guess, rewrite history and not tell the truth about history. But also it's an effort, in our courses, we don't just talk about things that happened in the past, we talk about things that are happening in today's society. It's an effort to try to ignore the fact that there are so many different types of discrimination in today's society. For example, just recently in Jacksonville, Florida, 3 African Americans were shopping in a Dollar General, and a young white man drove from suburban Jacksonville all the way over to the predominantly Black area of town and just gunned them down. And when the governor went to, they were having, on the same day that it happened, the mayor was there and city council persons were there, and they were talking about what had happened. And the governor and his wife came and they were booed because he referred to this man as, oh, he's a madman. But really, this was a person who was a racist, and even his own father, his own parents admitted it. So it's an effort to try to erase history and to try to pretend, for example, that slavery wasn't that bad or Jim Crow wasn't that bad or those types of things or the other types of discriminations weren't all that bad. But it also is a way to try to make it seem like there's no racism in today's society. But if you watch the news, or there's no prejudice or discrimination in today's society, but if you watch the news and if you keep up with what's happening in current events, we know that that's not true.
That is when the news also report, mainstream media, when they actually report rightly, right? So yeah, I mean, you know, forms of discrimination, particularly anti-Blackness, and that is something, you know, I feel like there are so many people come from various backgrounds, right? Races and everything, but we are all part of this nation state. And if we don't know the history, how on earth are we going to make changes? I mean, we are not supposed to maintain the same, right? Like the whole point of us was to evolve and change and grow and, you know, move towards, at least from my perspective, a decolonized future. And how do we bring about a decolonized future if we don't know our history? So, you know, that's my, you know, if you would like to say more, ask, you know, maybe you have questions. Yeah. Oh, there is a raised hand. Oh, sorry, no, Amy first.
Well, I put an answer in the chat, but the state auditor of Mississippi was pretty clear that he was recommending axing certain programs because people who study those things often leave the state. And so Mississippi needs to protect its investment by offering programs that keep people in the state. And similar sorts of things have been said about why they were axing foreign languages at the University of West Virginia, right? If we want people to stay in the state, we need to limit their options so that they don't see that there's other things that to do and other places to go. That's pretty, it seems incredible, but we're at a point where people are saying that fairly openly.
There is a hand raised, Loan Nguyen. Am I
That's
saying
right.
it correct?
This is Loan Nguyen, and I am of Vietnamese heritage, and my pronouns are she, cô for my Viet identity. And I really wanted to thank you, Clax, for hosting this conversation, and thank you, Amy and Sharon and Laura, for being the voice to bring light to something that is damn insidious, that we normal people, common people, don't get to know about the background of the academia and what you have to fight for in all of this gender studies. I happen to live in Sarasota, Bradenton, Amy, so I'm very familiar with New College. In fact, I have friends who, you know, have left New College because of the atrocities that have been happening. Laura, I get to attend Clax in person, living here in New York City, which is a blessing. And thank you, Sharon, for doing the work that you do and the book that you have. The topics that are being raised here tonight is so deep in this systematic institution. And for the most of the people, myself included, who are attending here, I just wanted to really ask each of you to offer your words of wisdom when it comes to what can we do? What can I do at this level, right? Of having to go to work, having to make a living like all of us, but at a level where it is survival. What can we do to keep our minds broadened, to keep our heart open, and to keep aware of what is happening in our own area? As Laura mentioned, here in New York City, we think it's so progressive, but my God, the things that you have said, it's ridiculous that you have to go through all of that 11 years of not getting the support. So yeah, I just really wanted to bring home to what is the concrete ways that we, the masses, myself included, right, can really be more aware and more attuned. Thank you.
Well, I'll go ahead and go first. I think the best thing you can do is what you're doing right now, just participating in programs like this to make yourself aware of what's going on and also supporting programs like this. And then also for the students, just try to take the courses because, we really do need those enrollments and support the programming. And then also, I mean, I hate to bring up money, but the reality is that they're cutting funding to a lot of the programs that all of us really are passionate about. So if you can try to donate to those programs.
Yeah, I think to put on my CLAGS hat now, right? So CLAGS is a center at the Graduate Center at CUNY, and we absolutely have minimal resources and do so much important work, and so supporting us with your participation and your donations goes a long way to allow us to create the kind of free public programming like this conversation. And I think that we're so, CUNY faculty, we are so good at making do with limited resources. We're so good at making things look really polished, or as polished as possible, and like they're running in ways that are really efficient. And but just peek underneath behind the surface, and it is often be a labor of love and service by a few dedicated folks, and there's just less institutional support than you might expect on the outside. So it is really important that each individual person make their contribution, not just financially, but with participation, with attendance, with volunteering. And that's something that everybody can actually do, just a little bit. I was going to turn to Dean Spade again and think about the concept of mutual aid, and also Kathy Cohen, who talks about coalitional politics, but people joining together and doing little bits in mass numbers can really make a difference. And it can help us get past the, maybe the shutdown mode that happens when we get overwhelmed with and bombarded with all the news. Like those little things really do make a difference.
There are more questions, but I'm not sure if we can do that. But I wanted to, before we close up, I wanted to let you all know about our upcoming events. Matt, do you want to announce some of the upcoming event, particularly the Kessler lecture, if you're there? I would say that, our next, please attend. Like, Laura said, one of the things that we can do is, of course, donate. We live, as I said, our economic system within which we have to function. Please make your contributions, but also attend. All right. So thank you for everyone who attended today. Our upcoming events, the links are in the chat, and our upcoming big event is on December 7th. Laura, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, so I just put it in the chat and Donna followed up with the link, but we actually have another event tomorrow, which is a trans activism dialogue. So for those of you who are interested in learning more about trans activism and the way that people can make change in the world around these issues, please come. It's virtual, so you don't have to be in the New York City area. That is tomorrow.
If I can make a plug for something, and I don't know that I have the technical capability to put a link in, but in 45 minutes, Maya Wiley is going to be giving a talk sponsored by Alt Liberal Arts, which is an organization that Bard College and OSIN and New College alums have started to support the type of curriculum that we are losing at New College. So she's going to be talking about the assault on critical race theory at 6 o'clock. So if you Google alt liberal arts and Maya Wiley, you should be able to find it. And I'll just say that Marvin Dunn is going to be introducing her talk. Another shout out for the amazing Marvin Dunn.
Finally, I will close up by saying that our Kessler lecture is coming up on December 7th. The links are in the chat, but also look up clags.org under events. All our upcoming events are there. And to close off, I really, really want to reiterate one fact, and that is academic freedom to teach these subjects are under attack. What can we do? We need to, step into the history that gave us Black studies, student demands, revolutions, but most importantly, there used to be a time when these were obviously not taught within the university, but we had freedom schools, right? And today, we have different versions of freedom schools. Learning is going on, teaching is going on. Whether these infrastructures allow us to do that with proper resources, that is the question. So thank you, Sharon, thank you, Amy, thank you, Laura, and thank you to all our ASL interpreters, to Matt Brim, to Yasmina and Donna, for being here today, and to all our audience for your enthusiastic support and participation. We are so grateful to be holding this space with you. We want to see you at our future events. Thank you so much. A round of applause for our participants.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Deborah,
Thank you,
for
everyone. This is
organizing
wonderful.
this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.